demeaning, making kids' minds like vegetables, talk about them out in the street smoking pot.
So when I say the phrase cinematic game, there is a strong, undoubtedly strong notion that the first thing that popped into that big ol' melon of yours was something like The Last of Us, or The Last of Us 2, or Uncharted, or Tomb Raider the reboot, or Final Fantasy XIII, or Final Fantasy XIII 2, Kingdom Hearts 3, or Final Fantasy VII, the 2020 remake. But those are cinematic cutscenes. I don't want cinematic cutscenes. Oh god.
Ew.
You're such a dork. Why would you even think of that? I fucking hate you. My biggest issue with these games is that their cinematic moments tend to boil down to quick-time events, or a game of Simon Says with button prompts. I don't find that to be enthralling. In fact, I consider it to be immersion-breaking, to be fully captured in what is an admittedly beautiful world that does frame these incredibly grandiose and cinematic shots, to suddenly get a big fat X square, circle, circle, X square, circle, circle, or boil down to somewhat mundane repetition. Again, not bad games, at all. But I'd like to focus beyond the more obtusely cinematic scope that these Naughty Dog games provide. The word game, literally, in fact, objectively, defines an interactive experience. As to game is tantamount to play. Let me even get some citation here. A form of play or sport, especially a competitive one played according to the rules and decided by skill, strength, or luck. That is straight up the first definition you get when you look it up on Google, and all instantaneous examples related to the prior definition would absolutely require some form of player input, be that digital or athletic. A game being cinematic wouldn't be you watching a cutscene. That's a movie, something that's viewed in the confines of a cinema. In fact, the term cinematic almost exists in contrast to that of game, as to be in a cinema would be to be viewed within a theater. So, when we break down instead the ideology of cinema and apply it instead to gameplay rather than sedentary cutscenes, what? Pray tell what makes the process of playing a game a cinematic? Well, let's get into it. The most important thing to keep in mind throughout this video is that you as a player should always be engaged within the game you're playing. You shouldn't be like, oh no, look what happened to Batman. You should be like, I am fucking Batman and I'm gonna cave in your goddamn skull with my knee. You are the character. You are not the observer to the character. Cinematic games emulate the feelings of cinema, but require your direct input or action. Once upon a time, there was this little blue bastard by the name of Sonic the Hedgehog, and millions upon millions of people all over this big blue ball of earth have spent hours upon hours meditating and pondering upon what unique tang may be present within those succulent little tootsies. And this obsession with the cartoon hedgehog's feet eventually cultivated into what's colloquially known as Sonic 06, a game released in the year 2006, starring the character Sonic the Hedgehog. Official title, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic 06 offers up beautifully rendered CG cutscenes with amazing lighting, effects animation, and this wicked satisfying character animation with a fantastic sense of weight to it, constantly adhering to the principles of cartoon character acting. Unfortunately, the actual gameplay in itself is a huge pile of poo. Not cinematic in the slightest, thanks to a near-inept sense of design. In fact, it's wicked lame. Now flashback to I don't know, 1996? Man, they really should label these things. Sonic 06 at least got that right. But it was around that year, probably, I don't care, when Sega popped out Sonic 3, as well as Sonic 3 that goes on top of Sonic 3. In this bad boy on top of this bad boy, we had moments within gameplay that seamlessly flow from a player-controlled movement into an exciting or bombastic moment. It almost feels like you're in a movie, only instead of being an observer, that controller's always gripped in your hands, ready to react at a moment's notice. It's not just fun, it's also kinda epic though, bruh. When Knuckles plummets you down to what could be your death, your hand is always on the controller. So he's plummeting you. He's taunting you, and you are sick of him, and you want to bop his goofy ass on the head a few times. When you're running away from napalm bombs in Angel Island Zone, you feel tense in a narrow escape. You feel like Indiana Jones on the very edge of your seat, running desperately from a looming and always dangerous threat. When the level transitions from the pretty jungle to its now fiery aftermath, it feels like an adventure kicking off as the music beat alters and you run forward into danger. It gives you these 16-bit Genesis twang and all. The transition post-level load merging seamlessly, keeping your adventure consistent and uninterrupted even past said level load. That is a cinematic game. That is an interactive experience that makes you feel like you're on an epic journey, where mystery, excitement, and intrigue are around every corner, capturing a childlike sense of wonderment within you, only rivaled by the most immersive and exciting of films. In fact, Sonic, or at least his music, was always meant to have a slight cinematic flair to it. Composer Masato Nakamura initially set out making the music for Sonic 1 and 2 to create a movie soundtrack before making a game soundtrack. And now we have that same ideology, but given a potential kick in the ass from the king of pop himself. The third installment really nails it. Now, flash forward to like 2001, I guess, where Sonic Adventure 2 took this formula of minimalistic cutscenes seamlessly flowing within gameplay and player interactive moments, and heavily expanded upon it by incorporating a sense of rhythm to it. Editing is now a slight factor, as we have music tracks timed to Sonic's initial descent and movement throughout City Escape, bumping up your adrenaline as the police dispatch can be heard in the distance, ramping up the intensity of your escape. Crush 40 going nuts behind you as you run and have fun smashing through cars in a pseudo San Francisco, until all of a sudden this giant-ass gun truck is like right on your ass trying to kill you, and oh my god, dude, it is just like the napalm bombs again, only this is like way more intense, and there's this sick guitar riff. It's just the Indiana Jones philosophy again. You're a cool-ass hero on an adventure. A Sonic adventure. You know, when it comes to old games, some people would think of something like Ninja Gaiden or Astion X instead of Sonic 3 as an example of a cinematic game, but just like, stop right there, okay? These are cinematic cutscenes again. There is literally nothing cinematic about the core gameplay of these two. It's a standard side-scrolling action game, the only standout being that they're wicked hard. You know what else is old, hard, not your dad's belt, but also extremely cinematic? Castlevania, my man. I mean, doesn't that make sense though? They built the whole game with this B-horror film motif in mind. And despite the inherent simplicity of the NES, it gives you these genuinely epic feeling shots of Dracula's tower.
Is that tower flipping me off?
Booming in the distance as you strut forward, like a long cut wide shot of a hero running on an epic journey. Entering new screens incorporates editing ideologies again, potentially by accident, as the scroll builds anticipation as to what will enter from stage right, once again allowing designers to control the flow of your gameplay the same way an editor controls the pace at which you take in an experience. The game does open on a cutscene and then ends on a more photogenically composed still shot, but those two moments are very few and far between the actual in-game moments, allowing for most shot compositions, as simple as they may be constructed by the player. Speaking of shot compositions, there's a good chance you more film affluent people have already had a little light ding off in your head about cinematography. Well, game design is basically an experiment as to how well we can manifest wide shots into our final game in a cinematic nature. Something like Limbo is a good example. Similar to Castlevania, the shots create an excellent sense of depth of field, sometimes even creating what could be considered trailer shots nestled right within gameplay as their set pieces, all done in a silhouette aesthetic, and often emulated by a few other developers after the game's release. I specifically remember Mighty Switch Force had a pre-boss segment like this to build anticipation, but I think Rayman Origins and Donkey Kong Country Returns did moments like this as well. Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much designed with cinematic wides in mind, trying to build a very readable and clear space that works for gameplay as well as for atmosphere and horror. As you can see and also feel, old Resident Evil games had fixed camera angles, which similarly lets the editing be incorporated to build tension when you switch angles moving forward from screen to screen. Sometimes by design, you never know what's around the corner. You can often hear it coming in the distance, but you never know for sure when it's going to jump out at you. And if you're not careful, you can accidentally end up jump scaring yourself, rounding a bend to a waiting enemy and a music sting. It's brilliant. Resident Evil cleverly utilizes shapes and vertical lines to build its composition and scare its player, using those very same shapes and lines to hide things in plain sight or limiting their field of view. I had a buddy who made the argument that cutscenes being in-engine, like in the OG Metal Gear Solid, offer a much more smooth transition and help to build immersion, as you may get a chance to ease your grip on the controller, but you're still watching the same game. And I think he's onto something there. You're definitely onto something, Kevin at the Evola on Twitter.
I know you're hiding the hair somewhere, bro.
And actually, similar to Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid often uses fixed camera angles or panning shots to convey its compositions, making the transition feel very smooth to in-engine cutscenes as opposed to pre-rendered cinematics. Counterexample, however, this method feels very weird and lazy in the cutscenes for the OG Star Wars Battlefront 2, not the new one. Haven't played that. Tamara Morrison's narration is totally killer. That stuff legit gives me them goosebumps, man, especially when layered over that epic John Williams score. But oh my god, are these visuals unsatisfying as hell in their own right? Like, even when I was like a little kid, the most interesting thing about these cutscenes is noticing an old beta model slip through the cracks, or like something from Star Wars Battlefront 1, be it a model or a sound effect. When you pass a certain height in World and Conquer, the cheery or otherwise music will fade out and be replaced with the sounds of rushing winds and hawks calling, as if you're at the summit of a mountain, giving you this chilling feeling like there'd be very real consequences if you were to plummet down below, exploding into tiny jibs with your still beating heart bursting out of your chest if you mess up. Climbing up the ladder in Barnyard, your camera's always at a fixed angle, always pointing up and ahead, letting you anticipate the pesky patrolling wasps at the summit. At the very top, there's a diving board, which the camera automatically directs your eye to, which is good direction, but what I want to focus on here is your full panoramic view of the skybox. Now, with a comfortable position for free control over the camera, you can now stop to take a look around and take in the illustrations in front of you, depicting every world in the game that you will soon venture to, which is exciting for a player. But with this chilling and very scary ambient sound, what was once a gratifying and peaceful moment suddenly kind of feels bittersweet and ominous. Like, it's cool seeing everything up here, but you have to imagine this for Conker, the character. All this little guy wants to do is go home, and looking at all this, all he can do is just sit here and think like, oh, I got a long day ahead of me. They also pull off a very similar vibe to all those Sonic examples I mentioned before, when you're running away from a bunch of wasps, as they're right on your ass. If you stop moving or misstep, then they'll stab you right in said ass, and it feels like a stranglehold to get away from them. It feels intense. It's actually scary. But going back to wide shots and side-scrollers again, Inside creates a similar vibe to the above examples. In fact, it creates a vibe a lot like something you get out of Portal, like you're alone, though not quite completely, merely alone in a strange place where no one knows your name. Its shots incorporate depth of field even more heavily, making them feel vast and endless, yet your path to safety cuts straight through it all. It's not worth me going too deeper into this on the base level, as by this point I'd be repeating myself a lot with my points, but I will mention the rule of thirds with Inside's shot compositions, as your character can often be centered, but objects on a screen will be laid out unevenly and naturally. Rule of thirds is a photography rule used to construct a visually harmonious composition. You divvy up a screen with lines based upon the thirds of the frame, and you get sweet spots in which you can easily balance your shots. It's actually applicable in most video games, as to give you a better view of what's in front of you, they often position you near the bottom third of the screen, keeping the visually harmonious design while creating a much more fair field of view. Perfectly centering things can sometimes make a shot feel creepy or inhuman, as it feels too perfect, and vice versa, putting things all the way to the side makes them feel uncanny, as if they're entering slightly out of reach and familiarity.
You look absolutely stunning tonight. I just thought I'd let you know that.
Inside manages to make you feel like you're within a natural space, but a very comfortable and extremely unfamiliar one, like the phobia of being lost in a crowd or in the woods realized in a game format. The Atari-style indie game Faith, despite its simplicity, creates one of the thickest and most tense atmospheres ever, preferring to expunge its narrative through secrets that offer expository lore to the more inquisitive player, thus making the game world inherently feel more interesting in your hunt for answers within an otherwise mysterious tapestry weaving before you. In the same sense as Resident Evil, the edge of the screen being used to build anticipation is still applicable here. Your eyes are always darting around the edges of the screen to look for a charging and very loud monster trying to scare you. It's not really incorporating editing at all this time outside of sound design. It's very strictly done from a simple far shot that manages to emulate the feelings of being lost in the woods at night, cautiously checking around each corner, until all of a sudden editing is incorporated and this rotoscoped ass scary boy comes running up at you and it's... I totally just had a... and thought about Monster Party on the NES. There's an honest-to-God jump scare in that game that totally changes the entire tone of the stage. That was all I really had to say there. It's dramatic. I think there's a key element to the cinematic nature of the game beyond just editing, cinematography, and story beats, however. It's just how it feels to be playing the game. Does it feel like you yourself, are on a journey? And does that journey keep you fully immersed in the world you're playing in? Well, let's surface a comparison. Earthbound, or Mother 2, by that definition, is a cinematic game. However, the Game Boy Color Pokemon games are not.
What is Pokemon?
Pokemon, again specifically the Game Boy Color games, does not feel like an epic journey. It feels more arcadey and grindy in its nature. You're not clenching the controller pursuing an objective with an intricate and ever-changing world. Most you're getting is new Pokemon to snag each time you change levels. And the most standout world you get is Lavender Town. Other than that, it's all pretty much the same. Pokemon isn't cinematic. It's more like taking your dog to the park and letting him play with the other dogs. I mean, Tommy's a good boy, and he's very friendly. It's a fun time, but it's routine, and it gets repetitive. Maybe other parks around the city will have other dogs, but you're still doing the same thing. Earthbound, head over heels, feels like a journey. It feels like you're just a kid going on a long journey across the country in some old, worn down, yet comfortable Mercedes-Benz from 1999 that you found on Craigslist for like $2,000 and you're still in the middle of paying off. You go all over learning new things about yourself, talking to interesting people, seeing interesting things, making new friends, and all while playing your dad's old mixtape of Beatles and Beach Boy songs on the Mercedes cassette player. The game has moments where you're just meant to stop and soak in a moment in front of you as a fun or tranquil experience, be it in a hot spring, at a concert, or discovering a new melody for your soundstone. Pacing the moment out with sweet music, making you feel sentimental in an instant, teasing you with the potential full song each time you acquire a new melody. You have these moments where you emerge into a level from a long dark tunnel into a sweltering desert, the sounds of a car's engine and horns blaring ahead of you, dirty winds kicking up all over as the music fades in as if a car radio is playing off in the distance, going into a new town surrounded by ghosts in the tunnel until you're suddenly dropped in the middle of nowhere by some guys in a van to fight zombies, going to a cave on your way to a new area, hearing a weird remix of the usual tunnel theme before entering one of the most obscure worlds of them all, fully playing out the weird part of the beat instead of the usual normal part you had heard on your way in. And that is only scraping the surface of what this game manages to do. And I really love this game. Can you tell? Now, when we're talking about story beats and twists and turns, we have to consider the idea of subversion, a trick being played upon the audience that's hopefully as satisfying as a twist within the game. A real basic example will be jumping on heads in Mario 2 USA to realize that you suddenly can't squish it no more. But I think a peak of this instance would be in Metal Gear Solid. Again, they do these delicious third wall breaking moments that transcend the actual gameplay and make their way into the real world in front of you.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
For instance, having to read the back of the box to get a codec number in-game. After a massive and exhausting button-mashing sess, your subsequent codec call vibrates the controller and calls it a therapeutic hand massage. Or Psycho Mantis' boss fight, where to enter another brain and resist his control, you plug the controller into the second port of the PlayStation 1. Metal Gear really likes to break the third wall when it comes to how immersed and realized you are within the world they're trying to create. One feature is more an exploit and kinda breaks immersion as you have to leave the world you're playing. It's still cool and all, but the Metal Gear Solid 3 thing where you roll back the PlayStation 3 clock to accelerate the death of this one old and very patient sniper, like, it's cool and it's funny, but it breaks the world of the game very briefly. Now, you could argue that checking the back of your box or switching controller ports does this as well, and I'd accept that argument. All three of these are almost detective or spy-esque in how you use wit to solve a problem. I think my big thing is that the game has to stay on screen at all times while this is happening. Music and ambience playing while you switch controller ports is way cooler than stop, bleep, bleep, boop, 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 boop. Like with music and ambience going, even though you're looking away from the screen for those brief seconds, you are still Snake, investing a hidden secret and performing a very intricate technical espionage. Boop, boop. Boop, 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 boop. When you do that, you're just troubleshooting. You're Mikey from IT. You know, of all things, Call of Duty actually does subversion really well. Like, I have zero respect for Call of Duty as a franchise, but again, they do subversion perfectly. They have these Uncharted-esque moments where there's no real threat and you're just kind of playing Simon Says with QuickTime events, which, to be fair, I still thought were pretty cool as a kid. But I'm talking about like the nuke scene where like you're so used to your character being invincible and surviving everything that all of a sudden this genuinely tense moment where you fucking die is like really traumatic and scary and cool and poignant to the message of war and how war's fucked up. It's coming out of Call of Duty of all things, which is a bunch of stupid zombie bullshit now. I'd say BioShock, the Telltale Walking Dead games, and Witcher 3 are also really good examples of this kind of subversion, or just having really fucked up moments in your game. Similar notes about subversion, the indie game Anodyne manages to do this in a way that I fucking love brilliantly a couple of times, way before Undertale made the video game meta subversion cool. Spoilers for Anodyne, obviously. In the game, the attack and talk button are both bound to the same button press. Very standard fare, to be honest, but they add this little twist, where if you just innocently walk up to this kid fishing on the docks and try to talk to him as you have been with multiple other NPCs before him, you instead attack him, and thinking you did something wrong, you do it again. And then the kid just plummets off the dock into a whirlpool of blood below, which ends up being the portal to the next stage of the game. Later on in the game, you enter this distorted and black and white town that all looks like a fizzled out and weak signal on an old TV. The backdrop creepily contorting in a Dutch angle behind the foreground sprites, making the whole thing feel almost nauseatingly uncomfortable. Whilst again, when you're outdoors in this section, your talk key has become your attack key. Instead of a broom for a weapon, you just go around stabbing innocent people who aren't doing anything but wandering around. Going up to talk to them after lets you hear their last words, their final regrets, their final plans or intentions that they never got to realize. It actually starts to mess with your head in an almost three-dimensional way, because when you think about it, the atrocities you commit to these simple folks who are just kind of wandering around are the same type you might do to a bunch of meaningless and barely harmful bunch of slimes just roaming in the wilderness in their own village. And that unsettling overlay of dodgy and warped static? This world is out of touch, and you are out of touch with your true nature, delving into the madness within the world itself, becoming nothing more than a part of a larger problem, with no solution in sight short of a mass purge. You know, this game really does embody that same psychedelic spirit that Earthbound does, though it's less of a road trip and more like cave spelunking. A very dreamlike atmosphere guides you on a journey through beautiful pixel art, lovely characters and worlds, and this blissful yet occasionally sanguine musical score. I think this is the most I've ever been immersed in a top-down game, even more so than Earthbound. It always feels scary yet fun to venture out into its world of unfamiliarity and anxiety. The atmosphere is just laid so thick. And it's not all horror, of course. There's multiple moments of respite within your journey through the damned. One of the peak moments being when you climb a ladder, like a wicked, long-ass ladder, all the way up to this peak in the mountains, and you get to sit there for a second, stop, and reflect upon the beauty of the world. Take in the peace and quiet, and think about the journey you have ahead through this mysterious world.
Out of my dreams, just like a wave to the shore, you came into my world.
Half-Life is going to serve as the Pontifex Maximus to all of this, so don't you step out just yet, baby. On a base level, you start off a journey in every single one of these games in the direct shoes and eyes of your player character, and never leave the shoes and eyes of said character, bringing you on an uninterrupted and personal journey throughout the game, be it Freeman, Shepard, Calhoun, Cross, or Green. Story pieces just kind of always happen around you, or or are directly set in motion by you. Come to think of it, this is kind of like a roller coaster, isn't it? An amusement park ride. I think of Uncharted games as something more akin to that, though. Those games are meant to feel like you're playing a movie, but they often nullify threats or allow scripted animations to constantly and sometimes very awkwardly repeat until the player does what the game wants you to. These games are quite literally a roller coaster ride, an on-rails adventure. So Half-Life is similar to that then, no? Well, no, you can't exactly sequence break a roller coaster like you can in Half-Life 1, you'd fucking die. You can't be listening to someone explain the safety measures of the ride, totally ignore them, and then soar down with the safety harness up. This has a very obvious result. Even minor elements like being chased by a gargantua to trick it into being electrocuted by Tesla coils always has a very high level of threat to it. You are Freeman, and your level of ADHD, very much like real life, can have some severe consequences. But also, why would you really want to be an asshole like that? Like, these moments are all part of that ride, and these scripted sequences are cool as hell. They go the extra mile to make the world feel alive and make you feel immersed. Some events are even playing out in-engine, meaning despite the trigger always being the same, the result can be completely random each time you replay the game. For the time it came out, the AI in the game is even given some more legit reactions. You shoot a friendly NPC, and they either stop trusting you and run away, or they light your ass up. Sometimes, if you have two of them together in a room, they can even just chill there and have a basic little conversation.
This analysis is going to run perfectly today, don't you think? Positively. Shut up!
Black Mesa, being a remake of Half-Life 1, serves to expand upon these concepts while layering in more modern shooting sensibilities, most notably the weight, impact, and carnage present in the new Doom games. A very smart way of calling back, as at its concept and base level, Half-Life was heavily inspired by the Doom games. But I unfortunately do have to skirt around how cool Black Mesa is, as it is much more essential to understand Half-Life 2 than it is to understand Black Mesa. I've always liked how Valve cleverly lays out its set pieces, stages its compositions, and times its animations and movements. Without the player even realizing it, they've been made into an unwitting cameraman or cinematographer, just by being tricked into looking at the right place at the right time. In old games like Castlevania and Sonic, you are always in a perpetual wide shot. Limbo and Inside evolving those concepts to create a further sense of depth of field or a more stylistic flatness. Resident Evil and Metal Gear leave you more at the will of the camera at all times, having to predict or be on edge for the next area, much in the same vein as overhead games like Zelda, Guardian Legend, or Anodyne. Conker's Bad Fur Day gives you selectively full control over the camera, but always endeavors to put it in just the right spot automatically. But in FPS games, specifically Half-Life 2, you spend every moment of gameplay creating candids on your own little theme park ride. Except, unlike Half-Life 1, they don't let you jump out of the ride very much. You're locked very much into place in the story pieces now. The game is cleverly and intuitively designed with influences from film, photography, and comics to diegetically teach and immerse the player. Most predominant being eye flow, rule of thirds, patty cake or catch-esque rules of character acting, vertical lines, and shape hierarchy. Whether or not these flow, or how well they flow, is entirely up to the will of the player. Let's start with eye flow. It being a rule in comics meant to designate or approximate how a reader's eyes might scan a page, trying to sequence poses, word bubbles, and panels to make the experience of reading the comic feel more kinetic. When you first exit the train entering City 17, following moving objects as it happens, you're eased into the world first with beat-up and uniformed 1984-esque humans, before a burbling synthetic probe swooshes stage left in front of you towards a huge monitor, directing you towards Dr. Breen like a mouse pointer or laser pointer. You follow the other humans. The sound of his voice keeps you focused on him, as your peripheral notices the synth turn towards you and look at you. You look at it out of curiosity and it creates a penalty. It blinds you, establishing its very innocent though annoying method of attack. We also establish shape hierarchy here. The contrasting scale of the humans on the ground to Breen's smiling face high up on the wall establishes our social hierarchy with visual shape hierarchy, using vertical lines on the trains to narrow the focus to the established frame.
Also, the Combine poster is like right next to him.
Breen's cold steel monitor harshly contrasts the world around it, but it's uniform in design to the synth, letting you understand that these two elements are one and the same in origin. Breen visibly more content and well-dressed than any other human you've encountered. The patty cake rule of acting here refers to no two actions really overlapping each other in terms of spectacle. Your eye is always given something new to look at while not upstaging a previous element mid-performance, like a game of catch or patty cake. Tossing and trading the ball from person to person, the audience's eyes following where the ball goes. Sound helps this, as the burbling sound of the synth and Breen's smooth voice draw your ears in first before catching your eyes, or vice versa, it might actually be motion. It all depends on what the player's innate preference of learning might be. An even more clever show of power within visual storytelling happens when you exit the station. The first thing you see is this giant Washington Monument-esque pillar, perched proudly in the center of the city in a bygone time as a show of
patriotism
and power. It's now been heavily juxtaposed and heavily overshadowed to the point of irrelevance by a very similar looking but much more alien structure directly behind it, which totally overcompensates and pierces the sky, negating the symbol of the prior monument with how mighty and oppressive of a symbol it is. And once again, a complementarily alien-looking projection screen of Dr. Breen sits nearby, cueing you in as to where this smug asshole's domain is. This is referred to as environmental storytelling. Prime example of you didn't notice it but your brain did. It's the process by which you can diegetically convey narrative or lore through set pieces that exist in the world you're playing. It's actually pertinent to basically every game I mentioned before. Like Mario 64 is not a cinematic game, but it still has environmental storytelling. One of the more subtle ones being this big womp boy being like, I don't want to be a stone, Luigi, don't build with me, and then after you murder him by crushing him to death under your powerful ass, you come back to the level and there's a tower where he was, leading you to infer that he's a tower now. When you're running across rooftops to escape the pursuing Combine civil protection, there's a chance you might look back in fear, or look at a sound occurring behind you from either gunshots or a ship. When you do this while moving, it accidentally creates a multi-layered and parallaxing tracking shot. The Combine starting in focus, Citadel once again gratuitously in view behind them. A gunship swiftly passing by as you turn around to look at the gunshots, hand your eye to the right and up to the sky ahead, passing by a chimney stack as that happens, which can service as cover but also a scene transition. The chimney establishes a subtle sense of depth to the shot between the pursuers, the gunship, and yourself. And again, Citadel always looming there as a taunting symbol as the origin to your oppression and antagonism. Or hell, this is a simple one, but I have a long-standing and distinct memory of this one part in Sand Traps, where you jump down into a pit below, and suddenly a music sting kicks in as directly ahead of you, a giant new enemy emerges, roars at you, and beelines straight towards you like a bull, giving you ample time to both shit your pants in fear and figure out the best way to matador that big fella. However, I think the best overall example of Half-Life's diegetic cinematography comes in your very first combat sequence. Walking down a flat hallway where vertical lines are naturally formed, your eyes catch a health dispenser, letting you stop to heal up. Then suddenly you hear the cries of a woman around the corner, screaming for help in the distance. Caveman impulse is now in full effect. Once you're healed up, you likely charge the hallway to save the distressed female. Rounding the bend, the narrow hallway and vertical lines draw your eyes to civil protection in the middle of beating a man, his wife pleading for his safety. We once again get patty cake animation theory here, as the woman motions first, then the civil protection officer to her, and as soon as the cop glares, the second officer smacks the husband in the back of the head, knocking him out. And right after that, the officer who glared at you makes a charge at you with the very same weapon that knocked out the man.
My bad, that's not the same weapon.
The animation's catch-like format gives you time to observe and register the threat at hand within 0.5 seconds. That threat being civil protection with a cattle prod that's going to hit you in the back of the skull and knock you out. As your eyes are allowed to scan from left to right for the situation, then follow motion right to left, as if you're soaking in and then reading the scenario in that brief moment. You know, there's a reason this game is so beloved by people and so highly regarded amongst games journalists and artists, and I think with many others, it's forwarded games as art as being a more legitimate claim. In conclusion, the essence of a cinematic game echoes the feelings you'd get during an engaging film. However, it manages to do this by applying film, photography, animation, and comic theory to the interactive experience. Structuring things much like a roller coaster ride. Peaks and valleys incorporated for pacing, screen transitions, sounds, music, and slow movements incorporated to create a sense of editing and pace once again. It feels like an adventure that you are in full control of, like a road trip where every bend is a new experience, where every 10 miles is a new set piece or road sign or diner or whatever. You get to partake in an adventure and feel like a hero, like a champion, a vessel of escapism, much in the same way as you'd escape to the worlds of Bond, Wayne, Jones, Skywalker, anyone. Having a story beat or event happen in a cutscene in-game it still makes for a good story, but having all of that be the result of your own actions changes and molds that very journey to be more of your own. You are Sonic. You are Simon, Jill, Gordon, Ness, or whoever. You are not simply reacting. You are the one acting. You are the one doing. You are the gamer, gaming and playing the game. And I don't count QuickTime events because seeing a big-ass button press on screen sort of breaks immersion and is wicked lame. Kinda like how I said in Metal Gear Solid 3 you pause the game to set the timer back. It just ends up reminding you that you're playing a game instead of always being immersed in the world or experience of the game. Games have the power to be art, just like cinema. They've always had this power, and they always will have this power, and that is wicked fucking cool.